We're having an exciting day on campus today and within our department because we are hosting a special guest, Nicole Carr. She's investigative journalist, award-winning investigative journalist. She published five series of work about school board and chaos at school board, and I had a pleasure to read all these articles. Nicole is working and dedicated to topics such as diversity, inclusion, and equity. She's done work on critical race theory, so we are happy to learn more about those topics. And she's a dedicated teacher. As all of us here, we appreciate that you are contributing your knowledge and experience to future journalists. So with further ado, we'll give you a stage, and we're looking forward to hear. Thank you.
I'm going around the room to figure out who's in here because so we're an important community as journalists, as folks studying what is happening now. And to be honest with you, it was kind of hard to prepare for this. I have just acknowledged in the last few years that the climate has changed so rapidly, and industry has not been able to keep up with that changing climate. And it is, I wouldn't say hard to teach future journalists, but I think we owe it to them to teach them differently in this time. And so the skills, I'm less concerned with my students, and I teach at Morehouse. I have Clark and Spelman students who come over to a new major that we have, journalism and sports culture and social justice, and it just launched in 2021. And I'm an adjunct. I'm part-time there. I transitioned into Morehouse while I was reporting for ProPublica as it expanded its South unit, and I just left that position in April. But when I came into the major, you know, Morehouse had historically taught sports journalism. It started as a program that Spike Lee really helped ramp up, and then it became a major within the English department, and now it's this, a minor, and now it's this major. And they asked me to develop some of the coursework under social justice. And someone asked me, well, what are you going to teach? A friend asked me this. What are you going to teach? You're going to teach them to be activists? Like, what is social justice journalism? And I thought for a moment, and I said, well, yeah, I think we are, in fact, activists for truth and transparency, and we say that differently in mission statements. We don't call ourselves activists, but by definition, we reveal truth, and democracy dies in the dark, and all of these great things that we say about holding down the fourth estate. We reveal things so that you have the information to go and do something because you now have the information. We activate people. And in local news, I think about it in the mornings whenever I would have to fill in on the good old morning show. We activate people with weather and traffic, and so you can plan your day. We have consumer investigations that typically works really well in local TV when we're working for you. We're holding people accountable. We're going to get you that money back. We're going to make sure that you're not being cheated out of something. We're going to make sure that something changes for you, or that the right people, the people who have the power to change those things, now have the information we've revealed, and they can use that information and their power to do something about it. So I'm like, why wouldn't we call ourselves activists in some form? But language is very important. So we think of activists as political actors, and we say we stay out of that. We just give you the information, we do. But journalism has always been a form of activism. I also teach history of the Black press, and I maintain that the Black press democratizes America. When Freedom's Journal launches in 1827, it is in response in New York City to a powerful newspaper man who also served as a sheriff, who also served as a playwright, who also served as a politician. His name was Mordecai Noah. He had popular newspapers all over the city. And when John Rushworm and Samuel Cornish come in to open this, yes, we all know that with Freedom's Journal, they say, no longer will others speak for us, right? That is the mantra of Freedom's Journal, that this is to advocate for the colored citizens of this nation. The part we often miss when we're teaching about the onset of the Black press is that they're also answering editorials in Mordecai Noah's newspapers that explicitly say the Negro should never have full citizenship, should not be a part of this democracy, should never have the power to vote nor hold office, and that the Negro citizen should be in enslavement in perpetuity. So the Black press is a response to that, and it advocates for full citizenship, but really what it's doing is advocating for what is simply right in humanity. You might call Rushworm and Cornish activists. I'm sure glad they activated. They began an era of papers. They died in 2 years, and the Black press goes up and down. We go through 4 periods when I teach this class: enslavement, Reconstruction, civil rights, and moving forward. But it is actually a political response through the power of media. And so we haven't had an integrated press for a very long time. We're not that many generations removed from that. And so when we think about, I always ask my students to pretend you're an alien who's dropping down in this space, and I don't know, you pick a year, whatever, 1906. And you take a front page of the Black press in Timbuktu, America, on any given day, and you take A1 of the mainstream press, which was the white press, you would have 2 different realities. And one would be closer to what was actually going on as a whole when it comes to the climate of the nation, and that would be the Black press. We democratize America as we become an integrated press, as we reckon with the sins of our industry, as we think about the lens we're looking at things through. And so we came to a head in 2020 with this racial reckoning in America. And at the same time, we're coming through this global pandemic. And then those of us on the ground in the age of the big lie here in Georgia, local reporters, and I was at WSB at the time, we found ourselves in the middle of the biggest story of the century, and we found ourselves as targets during this time. So we're talking about accountability and democracy in the age of the big lie. Big lies are nothing new, but we are, in fact, in unprecedented times. And back to what I said as I opened, it was hard to get ready for this because I've been doing a lot of reflecting on what this means for our industry, what this means for us, what it means for preparing you. And all right, so the moment I knew we were in big trouble, like when I raised the red flag, it was the summer of 2020, it was August 2020. I'd come off maternity leave in February of that year. So I had my 3rd kid in November 2019 and took my months off, came back, did an investigation I thought we would be following forever, like for the rest of the year with the AJC, and it had to do with sexual misconduct, physical abuse at National Guard youth camps in Georgia. And we'd gotten the National Guard, all of the top brass to the table to put our findings out there and say, like, what is gonna happen here? And I remember the general was like really, he was antsy about the interview that day, and I figured it was the story. Like, we had some stuff that like the governor's office was gonna have to answer to, and Department of Defense was probably gonna launch this investigation. It was like bad, it was bad stuff. And we're out there in Cobb County, we're sitting down for this interview, and he does the interview, he gets out of there, but something didn't feel right. And a couple of days later, I understood that he was prepping for the COVID response, but we didn't know it was here. So that March, that week in March, our main anchors read the intro to the story. We do this. They told me, don't come into the studio. You guys, stay home. You can't do the tag for this. I was supposed to come in, do the crosstalk, and the last line of that was, all these kids are being bused from the military bases and taken back home due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And it was like, okay, that's just how we shut down. Friday the 13th is over. So we don't come out of the house. Now, my husband is in media as well, and we, strangely enough, had a studio set up in our garage for his tapings. He covers black college sports, and we were running the whole studio set. So when they said stay home, like, I had everything. He ran to E&G, he picked up the equipment, like, he's all happy about tinkering with our toys now that we're on lockdown. I'm not recognizing that I'm still postpartum, that this is a lot. This is a lot, and I don't feel good. And myself and my former colleague, Justin Gray, had to start debunking a lot of stuff tied to COVID. Like, that would be our daily beat. And so we don't come out of the house until that May, whatever Friday night that was, that the protests broke out. And I'm standing in the garage and I'm thinking, we can't cover this from the house. Like, this is the one thing, we got to go outside. But we didn't have any plans. We didn't know how to go outside. Like, we weren't pairing up in the news units with photographers. Like, am I supposed to drive my car into that? Do we, for safety, get together and just risk catching COVID? Like, what do I do? It looks like we're going to be outside. I will probably be sick when we come back. It's just like all this stuff going through your head, but you got to cover the news. You got to get out there. And so we get out, and we cover this stuff. And then John Lewis dies, and I find myself going on assignment, not because I was asked to go first, but because the reporter that was asked, his wife said, no way you're staying in hotel rooms. And so that's how I end up on the Edmund Pettus Bridge and covering that, one of the, in honor of a career lifetime. And then we get closer to this election. And in August of 2020, I'm on my Twitter feed, and this video pops up from the Hill.
Kaylee, the president said this week the only way we lose this election is if the election is rigged. It begs the question, does the president believe there's any circumstance under which he could lose the election fairly?
The president believes he's done a great job for the American people, and he believes that will show in November. He believes that voter fraud is real, in line with what we see all across the country, particularly with mail-in ballots, which are prone to fraud. Yes.
Thanks very much, Kaylee. Two questions for you. Firstly, given the president's tweet on Goodyear and lashing out at them, is the Beast still going to be using Goodyear tires?
I'm not going to comment on security matters.
Okay, and then I want to follow up with a question that I asked the president last week, but he didn't answer. I asked him about QAnon, so I wanted to know, have you ever heard the president talk about QAnon, and what does he think of the conspiracy theory?
No, I've never heard of that. There's a lot of media focus on that, but certainly never heard of that from the president. Yes.
Kaylee, just to follow up on what my colleague said over there with regard to the president saying make sure to get out and vote because the only way we're going to lose this election is if the election is rigged. Is the president saying if he doesn't win this election that he will not accept the results unless he wins?
The president has always said he'll see what happens and make a determination in the aftermath. It's the same thing he said last November. He wants a free election, a fair election, and he wants confidence in the results of the election, particularly when you have states like Nevada doing mass mail-out voting to their voting rolls. And when they tried this in the primary, it was a massive failure. Ballots were piled up in trash cans. Ballots were pinned to apartment dartboards. And with that being the system, the president wants to take a hard look at this and make sure that these are fair election results and not subject to fraud. Yes.
So the tweet that comes out is from the Hill. Reporter, is the president saying if he doesn't win this election that he will not accept the results unless he wins? Kaylee McEnany, the president has always said he'll see what happens and make a determination in the aftermath. This is the main point of the exchange between three reporters and the White House press secretary during that clip. And someone had asked in the beginning about him accepting the results, and we got all that chatter. And then another reporter, rightfully so, followed up and said, wait, I want to clarify. Are you saying that the president will not accept the election results? And of course, we know there's more after this quote, but this was the point of it, that he would determine in the aftermath. And I said, this is not how a democracy works. Oh, that's a phone call. That's my red flag. The flag is this is not how democracy works. And this is the phone call. Well, I'll go back to that. So the phone call came in almost immediately from my general manager at the time. And he's like, hey, how you doing? Like, I'm cool. How are you? Hey, I wanted to talk to you about that tweet. And I said, yeah, which one? And he said, well, it's not that I don't agree with you on this thing, but we have to be really careful. You know, we don't want to come off as partisan. And I said, I don't think I understand what's partisan about stating that fact. And he said that he had gotten a call from corporate, and they were, you know, they just want to make sure we're not crossing the line with our tweets. In fact, that Twitter stuff, you all don't even need to be on there. And this is before Mr. Tesla takes over the X space. In Twitter, I had come to find as, I remember back in 2009, I was thinking, this is so silly. Like, who's going to spend their time on this? And I was reporting in Nashville at the CBS station, and we had a 100-year flood that May, and people were tweeting. Well, I started using Twitter, and I was just like tweeting highlights from the BET Awards or whatever I was watching on TV. I was tweeting, and people would talk, and it felt like a gathering space. It was pretty cool. But then the 100-year flood came, and people were tweeting their locations to emergency responders from their rooftops. And I said, okay, this is a reporting tool, and like I better figure out how to use it and use it well. And then verification came, and I was really excited to get my verification because now with the algorithm, like you could get really good information to people immediately. It changed the way we were reporting in the field. And in fact, at the same station, there was a point where we were required to have like an insane amount of tweets per shift, and they would put out the report for that. And prior to me working at WSB, I was at an ABC O&O out of Raleigh-Durham, Fayetteville, North Carolina, covering the military. And ABC was one of the first station groups to put out social media overnights. And so we were now looking at social media the way we looked at Nielsen. And it was the beginning, I think, of industry trying to figure out how much of an individual brand are you, how much of a corporate brand, station brand, news outlet brand are you? And we never quite like figured it out. And then people were slow to get social media policies. But for the most part, I'd like never gotten in trouble over social media because I'm reporting. You get a little bit of personality, get a little bit of family. I grow up and get married and have kids, and viewers like that sometimes, and all of this. But now we're like on lockdown, and the climate has changed, and this is controversial. And I said, well, what do you want me to do? He said, are you asking me to take the tweet down? I said, because I don't take it back, but are you asking me to take it down? Because I want to be really clear about what I'm getting a phone call about in the middle of the morning meeting when I have work to do from someone above my news director, who I'm surprised has time to make this sort of phone call. And he says, no, don't take it down, because it'll look like we did something wrong. I said, well, I don't believe we've done anything wrong. I stated a fact, and I said, and I'll go a step further, I believe that's one of the most asinine things we've heard from the White House press podium in modern history, that a sitting president has indicated he will not leave the Oval Office if he does not win the election. I said, wait, well, actually, we should be covering this today. Somehow the call ended. I didn't take the tweet down, but it was a notice. It was a notice about how we were looking at democracy, how we were looking at accountability, how we were looking at our role in it. I remember sometimes when we were told, well, we're local reporters, like this is national stuff. All news is local news. Let's like get that straight. There's no national news. We're not outside of our nation looking into it. All news is local news. Everything starts from the bottom to the top, as my QAnon believing character in chapter 2 of my school board series told me when I asked him why he went to the school board. He said, well, because I can't talk to the governor. You start from the bottom, and the bottom is the school board. Probably the most brilliant thing I'd heard in interviewing folks, because you're absolutely right. Like, what's the one system most of us will pass through? It's a public education system, and it molds, it's democracy coverage. Education coverage is democracy coverage. So I said I wasn't going to take it back. I don't know if I was tired or feeling bold. I was tired, but not feeling like this is controversial, and really almost wondering, where are you going to take that? Like, what are you saying to me? And we just went on. Well, I was tweeting in the direct messages with a friend. I tried to blur her out, national reporter. And I was just summoned. And I said, I'm sick and tired. He said, girl, that is terrible. And these folks have no idea how to cover fascism. This was the conversation we were having in our DMs. You can probably guess who that is up there, but I won't say her name. And then we had what we had on the ground, a colleague and I who ended up with private security for 4 months, reporting locally on the national story. The chaos that we had here. I was on English Street with the ballots on January 6th, and that's what we had. So throughout the pandemic, because we were down in the house and we were on the devices a lot more, I think I started paying attention to social media a lot more. I also got kind of concerned with Governor Kemp at one time. And so what's wrong with this tweet, if anything? He said, in case you missed it, and there's another thing I have about language and how we adapt language to spread wrong information, and governments adopting the language of the newsrooms will lead you on an interesting study. But whatever, you've got comms, you've got people who do this for you, you operate a communications deal. He said, in case you miss it, media criticism of Governor Kemp for reopening Georgia is dishonest and hypocritical. Well, this is the first thing that caught my eye, because after fake news, dishonest kept, you're dishonest, that's nasty, that's dishonest. I started thinking about former President Trump. And then he posts the article. What do you think might be? Is this okay, or is it off in any way? Does it raise a red flag for you? The article? No? Yeah?
I don't like it when governors or politicians say media is dishonest, especially how hard it is to actually produce media.
Yeah, and sometimes we do it badly, and I believe we are to be held accountable to our audiences, to the public. I do believe that, but yeah, that's a little jarring when you're like, okay, what exactly is dishonest? So I want to know what he's talking about. But what else? Does anybody spot anything else that might make you curious? Well, I always look at the source. So I was like, well, what's PJ Media? Well, PJ Media is actually fake news. This is page 1 on Wikipedia of all the false claims. You can just pick one. That's page 1. And then this is page 3, and it goes on in Wikipedia. So I became really concerned about that being the source. Fine, defend yourself, defend policy, use data. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but amplifying actual fake news. And in some cases, a site that was satire, that was Christian satire, I started seeing that pop up amongst our elected officials. And so this is dangerous because no matter what we're talking about, it's dangerous because the most powerful and influential people have played with lies, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, thus normalizing the alternate reality. So it doesn't matter how big or small the thing is. It's just we started losing a standard. You know, fodder, disagreement, disagreement on policy, where we stand, that's expected. That's in a healthy democracy, right? But it's got to be rooted in some kind of reality. We can't just take what we want. Facts do exist. How you process that and what you do with it is another thing. You can have whatever thought you want, but facts do exist. You can think the election was stolen, but it was not. And we're going to show you how. And no matter how many times you elevate and amplify the lie, it doesn't make it true. But what it does is train our brains. What it does is allow us to begin to excuse our behavior. What it allows us to do is begin living in a different world where you can say that sky is blue, but I woke up and it is pink, and there's nothing you can say about that. So what do you do with that? What do you even do with that? It's dangerous because it incites violence. These two women have a lot of money right now. Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss are Fulton County election workers who were at the center of the big lie. Now have a bit of accountability from people who pushed, well, a person who pushed the lie, okay? They also have apologies from far-right outlets that had no interest in the truth, but had, you know, adopted news language, made websites that looked legitimate, reported in a style that makes you think this is legitimate. They have apologies on their websites now. There's ordered in settlement agreements. But do you think an apology in the good year 2024 means anything to the people who consumed the big lie 4 years ago? It means not a thing. The lie amplified by certain people does irreparable damage. You can't go back and repair that because we have a whole subset, we have a whole culture that does not care about facts anymore. They don't care about lies. They care about power, they care about getting their way, and that's all we have left. So they can have the condo, they can have the cars, they can go back to their homes. Maybe no one will bother them, maybe. We can't hold everyone accountable who has done harm to them because of the lie. The media outlets that published it lost money, but how are they backed? They're still publishing. So where's the accountability in any of this? Where is the accountability in that? I'm going to take us back when I start talking about the presidential candidates or the former president who has demonstrably lied over and over many years. When I talk about him, we're not talking partisanship anymore. We're talking a tough reality for us in our democracy depending on this. I don't endorse candidates. I don't contribute to campaigns as a journalist. Those are basic things. But we're also not meant to sit here and watch insanity snowball into an alternate reality. So I'm just going to take us back to the first cycle. Where is our...
No, Nancy, no, this was, and I moved her very heavily. In fact, I took her out furniture shopping.
You all remember the infamous Access Hollywood interview?
Some nice furniture. I took her furniture. I moved her like a... I couldn't get there. And she was married. And all of a sudden, I see her. She's now got the big phony... that she's totally changed her looks. The piece of Tic Tacs just in case I start kissing her. You know, I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. Whatever you want. Grab them by the... I can do anything.
You can do anything. You can even not be held accountable. So what is the problem when we each play a part in spreading any of this stuff? And even reporting on it in a way that doesn't explicitly say, this is wrong, this is abnormal, this is whatever. There's no accountability. So the things that used to be considered career killing, shameful, unacceptable, they mean nothing to our culture. And it seems super normal. You all remember a day when if you didn't show up for a debate, you had done something unthinkable in your career. I sit on the press club board. We've had issues with people showing up for debates. I'm going to stop the slides now because now I just want to have a conversation. Those examples, the deck, all of that may seem like these things are unrelated, but they're not. I don't know how we hold people accountable anymore. That's what I have to say. We have incredible journalists, locally, nationally, internationally, who have become targets and labeled enemies of the state, of the people. And we've also come through a time in recent years where we had newsroom policies. I'm not talking about a particular one, but I have examples in my head where we were banned from saying lie. We had to evolve to a point where we called a lie a lie. We have mismanaged our fourth estate. We have further eroded trust in audiences, and then that's compounded by the attack on us, false attacks, attacks with no evidence. And so when the public's trust erodes in this way, and we're in our bubbles and we're thinking about new newsroom models and how to reach people and how to get them information they need, what is any of it worth if they don't trust a fact? Misinformation, disinformation, malinformation are three different things. Do you know what separates them? Intention. Intention. So I could give you misinformation, and it was like I was just ignorant to the thing. I didn't know when I passed that along to you that it was misinformation. Disinformation, I know exactly what I'm doing, and I want it to spread a certain way. And malinformation, I want to see you harmed from this. I want harm. I want something to happen that may benefit me, but is not good for the greater good. So we've been through all those stages. We've been through the trifecta. We continue to do it. And I just don't know where we go from there if we don't kind of start over with this thing. But how do you do that? I don't know. I don't know either. I know that lies spread way faster than the truth, and there's data on how quickly the lie spreads. I know that when Elon Musk bought Twitter, that was not a normal business story. It was a democracy story and should have been treated as such. And people say, well, I don't need a blue check mark. It wasn't about you and your brand. It was about being able to spot people who would be held accountable if they gave you the wrong information. So if I'm using my verified account from wherever, WSB, ProPublica, wherever I work, and I'm spewing, I'm going to lose the job. The agency is going to have to talk about this. You're going to have to reckon with the consequences. The problem is we've let people go on with no consequence for far too long. In what world is your presidential candidate grabbing people by the... And it's not like, oh, that's just how he is, or he's so crazy. I don't know when that's okay. And that's the bottom of the barrel. That's like just the... How many examples can we come up with over the years where we've been like, this is not normal? This is, I forgot to put a clip in after the tweets from the White House press corps, but I could probably find it on Twitter really quickly, where a reporter asked him again about this claim that he wouldn't leave office, and he told the reporter she was being nasty, and you don't talk to me like that, I'm the president. All our coverage should have been about language and how leaders who talk like this lead their nations into dangerous territory. That's it. Not that it's unfair to Republicans, or that we're Democratic shields, or we're going to lose viewers who are a part of this party or that part, because we've moved beyond partisanship. We're talking about truth and then our responsibility to the public. I don't think I've ever seen something, maybe I needed to live in a different time, right? I've tried to study this a bit to bring examples in class, but when has it been so plain and we've been so derelict in our duty? The story about John Kelly warning us about what would happen in a second Trump president is on page A12 of the New York Times. Hillary Clinton's emails were on page A1 in the same week, however many weeks. We're not doing our job. So when we can't do that, couple this with all of the new outlets that populated 4 years ago to show. So if you watched, I'll pick 3 networks. If you watched CNN, Fox News, OAN, and anything that falls under that, if you watched a rally in 2020 leading up to the runoffs, if you watched the rally on 3 screens, you had 3 different realities. So when I began covering the parental rights movement, immediately seeing it as a political and a race story. And I started getting to know people and talk to them. By the way, I've never in my career had a problem interviewing anybody. Their views, whatever. And like holding them accountable or asking a hard question or answering them. My rule of thumb is if I'm talking about you, you're gonna hear from me. Like I don't broadcast print stories and don't pick up the phone and let you know the story's coming, no matter what role you play in it. Like that's just not okay. It's not ethical, it's not okay. And then when it's over, I send you the story. And it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you called me the N-word when I was in the field. It doesn't matter if we started off on the wrong foot. It doesn't matter if we have to have tough conversations after the interview and then you believe, you know what, I'm sorry I even talked to you. Well, let's talk it out. It's our job to do that. And it's gotten really, really uncomfortable in recent years, like on another level uncomfortable. And I've had people mad about stories. Like, I gotta get this, I can't Google myself without this coming up. And we talk about the process, what's gonna happen. I give the same spiel to everyone. We talk about it, and they can be mad, and I've been called names. And in Cherokee County, when I was reporting on an anti-DEI movement, and I had school moms on a private Facebook page talking about hunting down a. I'm okay with that. Not okay with it. I'm okay with it, but they never said it was wrong. So if it's wrong, I'm not okay with it. If it's tough, if we got to reckon with it, if we don't reckon with it until I'm 6 feet under or spread across the Caribbean Sea, I'm okay with it because it's a record of our time. So in an age where I'm not sure how you hold people accountable, because to be held accountable is to care about the accountability. It's to care where we go from here. And we have a culture now where I'd argue people just don't care. And that's not what we want to hear. I was talking to a friend of mine at a local paper. They'd done a great investigation about public agency. He's like, we haven't gotten any results. Like, we laid this thing out, and like, nobody's responding. 6 years ago, this would have been the story. And I mean, it's a public safety matter, something that needs to be addressed. But there's so much chaos. We say in the churches I grew up in, you know, the devil's the devil of chaos. Well, when you create all of that, people, you got to find time to process things. You got to take care of yourself. You got to make room for life, right? So I gotta get rid of all the noise sometimes. Sometimes I can't care. But then what happens when you just don't care to address anything? Because what's going to happen to me? And I think that's where we are politically. Not the message we want to hear a couple weeks ahead of the election, but that's how I feel. I'm going to stop talking so I can at least hear from somebody, because everybody's looking at me like, yeah, so let's talk. Let's talk. And feel free to tell me I'm wrong, or that it's not that simple. And then let's talk about where we go from here. So.
My main observation that I want to ask you about is this. If Trump says that he's not sure if Kamala Harris is black.
Okay, yeah.
The media, they go nuts over it, and they spend hours on end talking about it. She says he's a Nazi, and no one even mentions it. And I don't know if it's just me, only me observing this, and why do you think that is? When one person says something as awful as that, and we cover it so much, and when someone says, something awful and maybe she has the receipts for it, we kind of not talk about it. And is this part of that problem that you're talking about, holding people accountable?
It is, because people who like to spread disinformation, misinformation, or what have you, have figured our business model out, is what I would say. Like, you know what's going to get you on a loop. You know that when you say this thing, because we've evolved to the point of round-the-clock stuff. So we see, like when we're in our TV newsrooms, right, we know exactly when people click out. Like, we can see, that's why we keep our packages at, if we've gone from 130 to 120, or no, you need to be no longer than 110, we know what is happening because we can see the in and out. I mean, I will tell you, I won't mention newsrooms, but we've had newsroom leaders years ago say, man, this guy is crazy, but he's damn good for business. That has been said in editorial meetings. So we play, news is a business. It's the fourth estate, it's for democracy, it's all that kind of stuff. What we do is very important. We shouldn't stop doing it. We are a record of the time. We're a record of the time. In fact, we should think of ourselves first as more along the historian route than anything else. If journalism confuses you, think about what you leave behind for the people who are here when you are long gone. You are a record of the time, the first draft of history. This stuff isn't just cliche, it is what it is. So they understand the business of news. They understand the power of media, of owning the media. I would challenge us to always ask our students in our individual markets to research who your local media is owned by. It may surprise you. It does not match with the name of the group. Okay? So understanding, I remember being in grad school, Monday night, second semester, I was in a media business class for my master's. It was the most important class of my grad school experience. It was how I knew I absolutely wasn't headed in certain places. That's not how I wanted to curate my career, based on the business of news. So very early on, I was thinking very strategic about where I went, how I did it, and how I evolved in skill set. So back to what you're saying, they know that we've been studied, we're very predictable, we're often reactionary to our audiences. We keep the same thing up because that thing has worked. 3, 4 decades. This is the formula. This is what keeps us number one. We don't react till we start dipping. So evolution has to be in the business plan and not be reacting to business. Like, there's no reason for us to be where we are with streaming on a local TV level. Like, the technology was there, audience was there. We didn't figure out how to evolve and do this thing in time. So now we're all behind, and now people aren't getting the salaries they want when they sign those contracts, and that's network to local, and that's everything. We just didn't figure it out. Because what do I have to worry about when this thing is working? Let's keep making the money. The way we should report those things, those statements, which are both like, huh? What do you mean she's not black? Well, on the black thing, first of all, in a country, that developed the one-drop rule, you don't get to manage my blackness. You don't get to define me. You don't get to define her, and nobody, my father's Jamaican as well, in a colonized nation where our ancestors were enslaved and could be enslavers, you know, that thing happened. It happened here, it happened there. If you make the rules, you, America, you don't get to define my blackness, and I don't have to prove it to you, and if I have said it my entire black life, that's who the hell I am. End of story. But if you want to cover this journalistically, why don't you give a little context, a little historical context as to how we define race in America? And don't worry about being called woke. It is what it is. Maybe she would identify different. As far as I know, she's identified as both, and that's what she is. I don't know what the story is. I really don't know. And nobody, by the way, questions whether Maya Harris is black. Maybe she looks a little blacker. Maybe it's because her husband is black. Like, we got to get a hold on this race thing. It's been a non-story. By the time we got to Dana Bash's interview, like, get out of here. What is this? The Nazi interview, cover the receipts, but do also, like, go into your archives. Like, there are things that are demonstrable that really aren't controversial. There are things we call political that really aren't about politics. Listen, if I'm covering school boards, here's where I landed with coverage on school boards. People say, how'd you get this story? How'd you do this? Very simple, like, step back. I'm gonna just use a little bit of common sense. I all of a sudden hear the very same rhetoric to the point where I can now complete a sentence, whether it's in Timbuktu, whether it's in Iowa, North Carolina, upstate New York. I'm hearing the same thing, repetition. That's how disinformation works, repetition. And I'm like, hey, y'all all woke up and had the same exact thing to say? That seems odd to me, like the same exact thing. And then we were hearing about the same books, and I'm like, okay, maybe everybody's online, they get the thing. But we start covering a concerned parents movement, and all the folks turning up in the board meeting, yelling in the board people's faces. Here in Georgia, we have people banging on windows, forming prayer circles, telling school board members they're gonna hunt them down. I'm largely, just my naked eye watching this over time, I am largely seeing white people. I also, and I've written about this, talk about this, whatever, I'm a suburban mom. I've got 3 kids. We go to soccer, we drive the SUV, we go on family vacations, we know our neighbors, we live. I'm saying, I carry the PTA card, didn't finish my presentation. I'm at the school last night I'm concerned. I don't see people who, we did not get the memo. So now I'm wondering, like, what is it? Because on the surface and by language, we're calling it a thing. So you start digging, you start asking different questions. And you don't have to take my word for it. It's an observation. It's not our job to make an observation and report it. It's our job to make the observation and then see if there's something to report. So that's where we get, I just took us, like, how do you measure this? I'm like, well, what happened to all these people who got arrested at school board meetings? Like, who are they? What did prosecutors do with it? So just make a database. Track it. We know how to do journalism. And then you say what it says. And this is the proof. And I just don't know what's so hard about that. And overwhelming, now that's not the entire movement, but it was getting to the height of the chaos, the viral moment or whatever. Everybody in our database over an 18-month period was white, except for one guy who said some crazy stuff when he went up against the anti-CRT people somewhere in the Midwest. The whole database. Okay, so then, and also as we get into the narratives, because then I want to understand, well, where's the messaging coming from? This is where you get into your political story. This is where you get into your race story. This is where, in our second chapter for the ProPublica series, the guy was QAnon. We had to be very careful about what we publish, because now, based on the interview, you have concerns about exploiting people, spreading misinformation. How do you report on it but not spread the thing that's not true? You got to think about these in different ways with the type of reporting you're doing, how that shows up. And he shared that, he got in with a community. He told me that he could not find anyone to go to Washington with for January 6th, and he'd gotten this community on Telegram. And when he met the women he worked with to do the thing that got him arrested and eventually charges dropped, he was meeting them in person for the first time at the school board meeting, but he had all the instructions and it was a part of a larger thing. And that thing is now debunked, and it's also, they were sent in that direction by a woman who is tied to Michael Flynn's movement, the Christian nationalist movement. And those are, like, when you go to a Flynn rally, you're not going to see black people. You're not going to see Hispanic, Latinos, for the most part. It was overwhelmingly, so we're talking race, but we don't have a construct of race or racism without a construct of power. We don't wake up, we're not born like, I'm this, you're that, and this is how I'm going to feel about it. We react to the structures that are in place for us to function the way that we do. And so this is not just your regular education beat or, a one-off in your community. We're seeing one of the biggest political, racial democracy stories, and it makes sense for it to be at the school board, and it's been at the school board before. What do you think a parental rights movement looked like when we were desegregating? What do you think the chaos at the school board looked like in that time? What do we think a playbook from the Daughters of the Confederacy looked like compared to Moms for Liberty? These are not, and I'm not talking about banned books. I'm talking about political power, structure, the face of things. And so it requires us to be, have deeper curiosity, to not brush things off, to not avoid things that are uncomfortable, and to be committed to a deeper kind of reporting every day. Because we're just doing the same stories we were doing 4 years ago. And all of these, another thing, when we're talking about the state election board or whatever we're talking about, go into your archives and explain to people who these people are. What role people were playing just a few years ago. Like the context of what we're dealing with and not the day-to-day, this is what happened today at the like we need to know this. So,
I had a question.
Yeah.
So my name is Blake Gully, a senior here at Georgia State. And so my question is around AI and how, like, the big lie, again, it's continued into the 2024 election. And I have a Truth Social, which is Donald Trump's platform, only to just, again, if you want to be in, you got to be in the room, just like with Rachel Scott interviewing him at the convention recently. But with AI and how it's evolved and how, again, even with like the Taylor Swift story that had some heat recently with her wearing AI, it was an AI image of her wearing a Trump shirt. I just wanted to see, what is your viewpoint on how AI has evolved and how it's been used to spread lies and news stories on like his platform?
Yeah, I mean, at lightning speed, and not just his platform. It's been at a speed. And so I'm not like Debbie Doomsday, but a lot of things have gotten way ahead of us already. So like to regain control of truth, you actually have to have people who want it. Because again, this is complementary. Like AI can be used for a lot of good things. We should know how to use it. I need to, as a journalism educator, I need to figure this out a little more. That's where I was with ONA and AI in the newsroom workshop. I'm not in the newsroom right now, but I'm like, how can I prepare my students for this? It has evolved at lightning speed, and I actually don't know the answer to that. I only know what we are charged with doing, which is hammering the truth and reality. But I don't know how you get ahead. It's already ahead of us. One thing we don't do, I see a lot of, and this doesn't have to do with AI, but like, I know we shouldn't help the algorithm. We want to point things out and we want to elevate, like, this is untrue. I'm going to quote tweet, quote X, quote post, whatever, this thing, and nobody's going to see your quote anything because you've just helped the current algorithm spread the original post even more. And so that's where the screen grab, and I kind of feel a certain way about the screen grab as well, but that's how that happens. So you're going to amplify even when you seek to disengage and debunk. So the only thing we can do is figure out the least harmful way to address it in that amplification. We also, when it comes to media literacy, like I don't know how many people are watching what's happening at the LA Times right now and the editorial board stepping down. So editorials are as old as whatever. I don't think we've ever done a good job at explaining to our audience what the editorial board is. I think more not sophisticated as in you're more sophisticated than me, but as in the news consumer understands that. Like a lot of times we're writing for people that we're not writing about or broadcasting about, so we're writing for each other. We're doing this thing that we learned, and like everybody who knows this thing understands what I'm doing, but not necessarily my audience or the person, especially in investigative journalism where we're highlighting this harm. Or one thing I loved about my old newsroom at ProPublica, there was a voting guide. They did a literacy series, Literacy in America, and one of the parts of the series was about democracy and about literacy rates and old poll tax and the history of, literacy and the voting booth. But when we got to, I think they published the voting guides in like 14 languages, made that available on digital. And I know one of our reporters reported on a farming community and lots of Latinos working on the farm, and they printed out the story and handed it, went there and did the newsletter and handed it, because who's logging on? Sometimes in a digital desert, or who even knows our news outlet that's fairly new in the landscape of it's been around, but everybody in industry knows it. How do we get folks who need it to know it? And it takes audience engagement in a different way. So anyway, I get off into other areas here, but to your point, it's figuring out how to responsibly amplify something and then move in from there. But we've got to make it a part of our practice, just as easily as we think about anything else. So, yeah. Oh, someone's in the chat. Yep.
Kennedy,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Kennedy, please unmute yourself.
Oh.
Yeah, we have a question.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. My name is Kennedy, grad student. The core mandate of journalism typically is about truth-seeking, accountability, independence, public interest, and transparency.
Yes.
Yes, and at the fourth estate of democracy, why is journalism gradually losing its core mandate as it's been protected by, the First Amendment, and why is the public interest is actually diminishing? I want to know why exactly it's happening.
I think what we don't, thank you, Kennedy. Thank you for being with us today. I think we take a lot of things for granted here in this country. It's so easy for us, for example, to look outside our borders and say, this thing is happening, and like, it's gonna be addressed. I mean, the way we report on the military, I grew up military, my dad, special ops, all the things, moved 10 times before I was 16, like didn't know exactly what he did until he was assigned to the Pentagon when I was in 4th grade. And I think about coverage of our heroes going overseas and defending democracy in the ways, and we kind of always get like, sometimes we can like sanitize the whole situation, lose context to like what it is like for people in a certain place. I don't think we knew what to do when we became another place. And we've arguably been that place in different eras. Like, I won't get into all of that. I mean, look, and this is because I teach history of the black press, but Hoover's FBI was ready to go after black publishers because they were reporting on Jim Crow within the military ranks, okay? He wanted to charge them with espionage. He was in Roosevelt's ear. Eleanor Roosevelt saved them, okay? That's pretty dangerous. The papers were then banned from the PX and the commissaries on our military posts. And it's a black World War II reporter, Charles Loeb, who really investigates the atomic bomb and the real effects of these things. Like, we've been here, but I don't know on scale. On scale with everybody. It's one thing to talk about Jim Crow America in the black press. It is quite another thing to talk about what we are talking about today. So how did we lose it? Well, it depends on the group of people you ask. To some people, you never had it. You never had it. Locally, I bet if I will always lean into race because of where we are and how we were founded and constructed. But black news viewers are probably your most loyal local TV viewers, and not just in Atlanta. Like, the way we kind of construct like our on-air talent and the way you connect with people, and they're gonna tell you about, what's Bob's last name? We've got a guy in Wilmington, North Carolina, Bob Townsend, who does Good Morning Carolina, and everybody, you know where they talk about Bob Townsend the most? It's not even in the rural areas where he lives. It's like in the black neighborhoods. Like, if Bob Townsend says that thing, that's my newsman. And so we historically, we want to know what's going on. We got a stake in this. It's just, but then you study harms of portrayals and lenses and everything else for the community, and you got to ask yourself, well, why do you trust me? Why do we come here for this? And it just depends on what the thing is. Maybe they trust us for weather and breaking news and not so much for the tragedy or whatever that's happening in the neighborhood, and it takes this connection. So we've always had audience, issues, trust issues. What we haven't had on scale, again, is people who don't live in reality, who will outwardly say that, who will just come out and they won't care. They do not care. So that's why I don't know what you do with that. But the issue of trust is not new. And then we always learn, I think we're really good at kind of looking at industry and atoning for the industry sins in hindsight. We study it. I mean, that's what we do in school. We look at the ways that, like, look at this headline, look at the way that the paper portrayed this. When we teach about Ida B. Wells, we look at what they were printing in the free speech versus what was in the mainstream papers. We look at all of those things, and we struggle with some of the same issues on a different scale in a different time, and sometimes those things feel new to us, but what is different this time is scale and alternate reality and AI. So.
Hi, it's Tim. Thanks for your talk. I just wanted to follow up on that. I think you're starting to get at this a bit, the question that I had. I mean, you said at one point, you said, I don't know what we do about holding folks accountable, but I think you kind of do. What kind of analogs, based on your expertise with the history of the black press, tell us, since you've mentioned so helpfully that the history of the black press is literally the history of democracy. So what have they done? Because surely my imagination is that the scale seemed impossible, the hill seemed very high. So what can we learn from the black press, and you're based on your expertise in black press history?
Well, thank you. I think what we learn is when America bleeds, Black America can hemorrhage, and that's also in the business model. At one point, look at the scale that we had, Black newspapers across America, and it ebbs and it flows, but we had hundreds of publications that are now really being preserved thanks to Howard University and their Black Press archives. I mean, that's a practice or an exercise in democracy to preserve that history. I often think about the ways when we're studying like the Tulsas and the Wilmingtons and the Rosewoods and the every town where, these mass lynchings happen. I always ask the students, like, when you think about property that was destroyed beyond people's lives, when you think about property that's destroyed, like what is one of the main targets? And it is always, I would challenge you to look into it, it is always the newspaper office. So that means something. Because it's a record of the time. So what we learn is that our business problems are not new. Because a lot of times they just couldn't survive off the model. Abbott with Chicago Defender, he's a genius when it comes to business and audience engagement, but then we have the Associated, the Negro Press, and all of this. So you got the wire service, and that's how Charles Loeb's reports come across the wire like this. But the business model, it just wasn't there. Also, there were decisions to be made about advertisers, right? So they weren't doing like nonprofit news and philanthropy, which I don't know where that would have come from in the time, but we're even struggling with that now. In philanthropy, but I just reviewed news organizations for Press Forward. We're looking at what do these funding models look like? What's the criteria? But they had to make decisions about advertising because not all money is good money. Are you going to so say Woolworths doesn't want to advertise with you and they don't want you in the store, but the skin whitening cream from Johnson & Johnson will give you this. Well, because that's the target, right? We want to be in the black press because we want you to think this is a standard of beauty. We want you to buy that. Then the publishers have to make a decision about whether I'm really going to serve my audience or whether I'm going to take this money and stay here. And is it possible to do both? And I would argue it is not. It is not. You don't give me those, one, you don't challenge the standard of beauty. You don't make me think something's wrong with me with the hair relaxers. Now all our stories are about chemicals and how we may have cancer because of this stuff that was heavily advertised to us. So maybe some people took the money and a lot of people didn't. And it wasn't just here. It's in the Caribbean press. It's in the, wherever we're talking in the diaspora. And then we have different ideas about the way to a full democracy. And I think that's a modern argument, right? So if we go back to Freedom's Journal, Rushworm is a part of the Colonization Society. Now, he is the son of a British man and an enslaved woman in Jamaica. And his partner, his business partner, Samuel Cornish, doesn't believe in the colonization concept. Rushworm says, this isn't going to happen here. We need to pick up and go to Liberia. And Samuel is like, and he's the one who's the good writer, he's like, no, that's not the way. We deserve to be here. And so Rushworm does pick up, and he goes to Liberia, and he builds another black press, and he dies there. He does those things, but it was like they couldn't agree on the business of the core, argument. What is it that we are here for? The mission statement. They couldn't agree on the mission statement. So I think we find very modern the arguments or examples of modern day issues that we face today when we study the Black press. But we also start to think about this idea of journalism as activism and reclaiming that word and redefining what that is. Like, I just think on pure definition, it's not controversial. It's just not. Like, what are you doing this for? If the information's not important, if people don't need it to do something, I'm not telling you what to do with it, but I'm hoping you do something with it, and I'm hoping it's in service to, I think we all do, humanity, democracy, stability. I don't see what's controversial about that. Ideas of what those things mean, that's where we should have healthy debate. And we should have that in any democracy. And no one people are a monolith. So I don't know. We got to study like this coverage of the Black voter and this and that. It comes up all the time. But I don't know. I don't know that there is anything new for us to learn. I think the only difference today is that we don't control the spread of it. It's the spread, it's the speed, it's the technology, which is all good, can help us do our jobs, but it's good in everyone's hands for whatever purpose. So as much as we like freedoms and no sanctions and we don't want big government or something, we actually do want, we actually do want a Department of Education, right? Right? We don't want to return to an era where there was no Department of Education. By the way, I'm just saying, like, amongst, I think, another major fail, it's so hard to hear about Project 2025 2 years down the line when you're like, people, again, not naming names, but the story was pitched when it came out. It was very clear who was behind it. It's not a thing until on a big platform and on award stages, like celebrities start talking about it. Like, what are we going to do with that 2 years later? What do you do with that? It's time to vote. So that's a fail. The book is wide open, in the open. It's not even a problem, and you know it becomes a problem because the head of it steps aside when it becomes a problem for a campaign. It's like, that doesn't belong to, we're not connected. Well, it's all your former people who made it. It's people who, I mean, you're planning to go through rosters of the federal government to figure out who's going to be loyal or a problem to an administration. Like, that's bad. It's not controversial, it's bad, and it's been open, and why weren't we covering it when it came out? We don't take danger seriously. And maybe we need to examine why. And who raises the issue and who doesn't. A comfort level matters, right? When you don't feel, why don't we see this as a danger? And I think that'll help us answer a lot of questions about newsroom structure and management and all the other things that we explore just across the board.
Hi, Nicole. Davia, like I told you earlier, I've been in your audience twice, so I just really appreciate always learning from you. You talked about the Black press, and so when I think of Black press at 42, I think of Ebony and Jet, period. Right. But as a fellow educator, I feel like our students, especially our Gen Z students, may think of the Shade Room, for example. So I'm just curious as to your classroom experiences as you teach history of the Black press. Do you find yourself kind of, well, I don't know your opinion on the Shade Room, I can guess, but do you find yourself trying to, like, of course, listen to the students to see if is this their version of the Black press? And if so, do you find that they kind of navigate away from Ebony and Jet? Do they feel like it's old? Just what are their thoughts and your thoughts about the origin of the Black press and maybe what it looks like now? That's their final paper for the semester. So I told you we break it into 4 eras. And do enslavement, Reconstruction, civil rights, then moving forward. So what is that? And what is the Black press? Am I the Black press because I'm Black and I'm in the press? Or do I need to be, yeah, like, is it a Black job? Or is it working for Black owned and operated? Or maybe Black operated and not owned? Is it one with a particular, is it global? I don't know how we talk about anything without a global mind, like anything that we talk.
And it's a split. Well, what happens by the time they are charged with writing this paper is that they've been introduced to figures and papers and things they've never been introduced to before. So they're thinking differently, and sometimes they're stumped. What is my opinion of this? Okay, so we've got to evolve. I think there's some really good stuff happening, and I think there's some irresponsible stuff happening. I think if you want to think about what's irresponsible, you think about why people say I have unfollowed. When you think about what's effective and what makes sense, why wouldn't Vice President Harris go on the Shade Room? Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you go on this podcast? It's the same way in former President Trump going where he goes that you don't watch. Like, there are lots of places you don't consume regularly, but he's not talking to you. He's going there for a reason. So, like, in a calm sense, in a evolving media sense, it makes sense to go to different spaces. How we understand that, I don't know. But I will say, I mean, there's a Shade Room reporter. He's working my old station who's sat in trainings at NABJ's, like a really good journalist. And, you know, he landed the interview. Like, I'm not mad at that. Good. But with that platform, with that power, we have to think about, like, what is the whole brand for? And people, I'm always interested in who runs the show, not what I see, but what is the business of it? And I think that's something else that we can explore. But as far as the Black press, I would argue there is room for, I think what Capital B is doing right now is actually really, really good. But I think a few years ago we would have said, well, you can't just focus, like, not everything can be about Black people, because you don't live in a silo. Like, your Blackness, your Black life depends on everything and everyone around you, so why should we just do this? And there's a very good argument for why you should. That's another thing, I don't claim to know all the answers. I'm curious as I watch this unfold, but some of the best in-depth environmental coverage I've seen, Adam Mahoney, like, he's in the Black press. I don't think I've seen coverage like this in many places. We also have newsrooms that cover these issues of our communities really well, but the writers and the people who greenlight things and the people who edit them are not of the community. I think that's a mistake. I'm not saying everybody needs, that you should only edit these types of stories or that type of story. The point of diversity, right, is for everybody to come to the table with the lens, the experience, the lived experience. I don't know how you report largely and exclusively on things that affect a type of people and you're not in tune. We can all learn, right? Somebody else needs to be at the table, because we've got blinders. This is all of us. We have blinders, and you just don't know what you don't know, and that's okay. But you can't argue that it's okay for your staff to look largely one way and that we're capable of covering these issues. You are not, because you don't know anything. You don't know. And you shouldn't use your point of understanding as the status quo or the way that I greenlight. Like, I have been told, you know, if so-and-so doesn't understand it, no one will. And I'm like, well, who is so-and-so? Because, like, this person understands it very well. So what you need to do instead of saying that is you need to come to the table and say, okay, well, tell me what I don't understand. Like, let's talk. That's diversity. I have argued for a long time. Before I really talked about race as an issue of diversity in newsrooms, I really thought, particularly in television news, we had a class problem. And those intersect. But if you're in the editorial room and your pitch during COVID is that the Labor Department says we have this many open jobs and people just aren't taking these jobs, like, that's the story, that's the lens, that's how we're going to enter it, right? Okay. Well, if the job is for the essential worker And statistically, the essential worker looks like this, and statistically, the essential worker dies like this, and statistically, they have chronic illness like this. Why the hell would that person want to take that job? Like, that's actually not the framing. The framing is what jobs are available, who works these jobs, and why they're not there. But if you say people are just lazy, there's a job you don't want to work, then you've, excused my language, you've f***ed your audience in the worst way during a global pandemic. You've done more harm in having that conversation amongst yourselves in your Zoom room, comfortable from the comforts of your home, where you get to come in later on and be one of 3 people in the building and somebody has sanitized the place for you. I don't want to hear what you have to say because you've never had to worry about where the next meal is coming from. If we're doing a story on truancy, I run my students through this, because this is how I teach social justice journalism. The one line I came out, I was like, what am I doing? What am I making up? I mean, facts are non-negotiable. Framing is a choice. We make those choices every day. We make them every day. And it changes the way we understand the facts. So if the sheriff's department says, hey, you want to do a ride-along with the deputy? We're going to find out where all these missing kids are from digital school. We've lost all these kids in online learning, and these parents need to be held responsible. You can either do the ride-along and not get the answers and not interview certain people, or you can find out, as my daughter had a classmate in the beginning who she was too young to stay home alone. Mom worked in the grocery store. Publix for a little while let her do her online learning in the manager's office. Corporate finds out. Can't have that liability. I'm checking in on the Zoom room. The child is in the car. How long can that last? What happens when something happens to her in the car? That's more than a truancy thing. What if it's like, okay, yeah, I got to find a pod, but where were we finding pods? You were finding them in our neighborhoods. People who had bigger homes, who had relationships with each other where, you know, don't worry, y'all come over here, I'm going to feed the kids this week. We had resources to form pods. Maybe you don't have that in your apartment complex. Maybe you can't, like those, I think about stories differently. So the why and the how is like where we get beyond the, we know how to do the basics. We know how to do the basics. And even in daily coverage, we can get to the why and the how. How many times have you repeated a story over 2 weeks in the A block? Well, the story next week shouldn't sound or look like the story from last week because you should have found something else out. Not just playing the same video or because the audience responded to, you know, the sheriff running naked through Piedmont Park. Well, what happened? You know, how do I find out what happened? Because he says this didn't happen, and this guy says this didn't happen. So what do I do beyond the police report? I am talking about a real story. It was the DeKalb sheriff years ago. And I asked on the 3rd or 4th day, can I have a shot at this? This happened over the weekend. I'm like, because I'm tired of hearing man on the street about possibly the sheriff maybe running through the park with his pants down. So take the police report. We can keep talking about this. It can perform well. I said, well, let me walk the route. And what do I see? I see expensive homes. So I know your surveillance works. I knock on doors and I say, hey, can you check your camera for this time to that time and give me a call if it happened? What do I get an hour later? Ring, Nicole, I have what you're looking for. And now we have a new story, because now you're lying on fellow law enforcement. You could have gotten shot when you were running away. What does it say about your accountability? Like, now we can start talking about some different things. And when the video came back, that's when APD calls. How'd you get this? We need that video. Why didn't you tell us you had this? Because I don't work for APD. But you can have it. I can tell you how you can get it. I can ask the guy if he'll give it to you, or you can use what's on the web or whatever. And you know what that ends up doing? Ends up in a rookie cop keeping his job because the rookie cop on park duty didn't have body cam. They didn't supply them with that. So it was the sheriff's word against the deputy word. So in one way, that helped save the guy's job. In another, it began the inquiry. And then the story the next year is not just about him running with the pants down through the park, whatever he was doing in the park. It was about when Governor Deal then sent up the inquiry, we began to do stories about how difficult it is to put a constitutional officer out of office. That's the story. I don't care what you were doing on Saturday night. Y'all talk amongst yourselves. But I don't need to run the story at MOS, and that's shocking, and because that's for clicks. I want to know what happens when you take the county vehicle and the elected official goes out and then they lie on the cop. Because, if we did that, there are, charges and things for that. So I want to know why you felt comfortable doing that. And has it happened before? And what really happened? And all it took was that's a day turn. We ran that story 2-3 days of people oh my God, at the gas station. Well, what else can I do with this damn police report? The report. So I don't know how I got there from whatever you asked me. I don't know, but I think we got somewhere with something. Okay.
Hi. Okay. So as a member of Gen Z, we grew up on TikTok and all of that. And in some ways, I feel like it's become this new wave or new type of journalism where anybody can pick up a camera and spread something and people can believe it. So I feel like in some ways, I don't know if it's a question or a thought, but is there danger in people being so willing to trust this type of journalism? Because I feel like it also pushes them away from believing in bigger news stations or corporate news stations like CNN and MSNBC and all of those stations. And with that, I also feel like there's this need or this want for everyone to feel like they have to unravel or debunk those bigger news stations because they're telling a lie. And what we know is true, and they're pushing this other agenda. Right.
So one thing we can do, I'll start in the news station before I go to TikTok. One thing we can do, and consultants used to tell us to do this thing, but it was novel and it was before this climate shift in audience behavior and distrust on scale. We used to do what was called process reporting in our writing, meaning you pull the curtain back to say how you got here. That worked really well in investigations because I think in a kind of vain way, we just wanted to show, I did this, I knocked here, I did this, and then that, and on TV you're showing yourself doing this. I'm working for you. But there was value to that beyond it. Processing how we got to the said thing. Now you tell me this isn't true. I have shown you this. This is how we got from A to B to C. I am showing you the receipts. That's all it was, processing receipts, and it was required in our writing. I think that's a great thing, because I can say anything, but how do I know? One thing that we would post that if you go to ProPublica and you'll see my former colleagues will sometimes do a thing, kind of like a how I got the story, or we'll do that in journalism trainings. We shouldn't just do them in trainings, we should do them as a practice. That's a good column. Let me take you behind the scenes, or our subscribers from the newsletter will understand how we came to this story. That's excellent. We should be transparent. With the TikTok audience, look, there's value in being able to see what happened at the biolab in Conyers before News Chopper 2 gets over it, right? We used to have to wait for the chopper or wait for the live unit to get there. Because we have the technology, we're functioning in a different way. You used to have to wait for us. We would show you that we would get there. Don't you worry. You just get home after 5 o'clock. I'm going to have this for you at 6. And we just can't do that anymore because people can spread that news just fine. What we need to be concerned with is media literacy in terms of what do you do after you see said thing? Well, now we've got AI and it can alter the images we're seeing. Maybe we're not even seeing what we think we're seeing. So trust is built into this, but we have to kind of, I don't know how we recalibrate the audience to say, yeah, that's good for in the moment, but you need us to give you the more. And that's why I think probably some of our old who, what, when, where, back to you. It doesn't work without the why and the how anymore. It's worth taking some time. Like, how long are you going to show the thing that, you know, at so-and-so showed up on 12 hours ago? I've seen that online. So now they're looking to us. It's actually pretty exciting, right? Like, we can think deeper and maybe change the way that we're responding to even breaking news. Like, who says you got to top the block off like this? I talk a lot about TV. I spend most of my time in local TV, but and then, of course, heading over into long form and narrative investigation and stuff. I didn't worry about any of that. I used to watch news to notice trends, and then I'd be like, that's where there's a hole. I'm going through this hole. You know, that's where it's at. But that's expensive. It takes resources. It takes time. But we know what we're doing. We know who we're serving. But even in those places, in those areas, they're thinking, the audience is not going to wait all year for us. Like, there's one thing to break the biggest stories, like the Supreme Court series, amazing series, right? It's one thing to wait. I'll wait on that. But I also want to come back to you for some, hey, what happened with this thing? And so maybe I need some of y'all to work a little faster and not everybody to spend 6 months or a year or whatever on a thing. We need something that's quicker. So it's just about us thinking about the business model and where the need is. So if the need isn't there, where is it? What will people value? A lot of outlets are trying to figure out what they'll pay for. I don't know what they'll pay for. That takes trust. You got to offer something that is so valuable. So it takes us being better. But it also takes us as a culture being better. We should want depth. We should want truth. We should want something to center us and make things better for our lives. But we have to want that. I don't know. I'm doing a lot of I have no answer for anything. It's not all bad. These are important jobs. Right.
I'm going to ask you something. It's going to seem a little random. So we have a lot of journalism students that are here and are going to watch online later. And so if you would share with them your journey, like what classes impacted you, what experiences, you talked just a teeny bit about how you sat in a class that was impactful and you were strategizing from early on. I think that would be super cool for them to hear about.
Absolutely, and that gets us out of the doom and gloom. I'm sorry. I'm like, no, so I'll start with, I think I've said this somewhere else. Someone said, what made you want to be a journalist? Because at first it was like looking at Claire Huxtable, and I'm like, I can be that, right? I can be, but that's power of media, right? Influence, looking at Hillman College, and my parents were first generation college and both went to historically black colleges. So I sat with that. I'm blind as a bat, so I was like, maybe I'll go be an eye doctor. Maybe I'll be Claire Huxtable. But I really loved, I loved Connie Chung. And my dad was, like I told you, he's retired military. I say the first time I realized what he did was in 4th grade with the Pentagon, but it's the first time he really talked about it. We moved a lot, and during his promotion ceremony to major, General Colin Powell was supposed to pin him, and something came up and he didn't pin him, and so we knew the significance of that because we had been talked to, and my father's Jamaican, and of course Colin Powell is. But it was really when I was in 5th grade, and he was a part of the unit where, if you've ever seen Black Hawk Down, that was them headed in. So I was like, oh, he does something serious, because one day he left and he didn't come back for a long time. We were told he was going on training, but this time they were really going. And so he didn't come back for a long time. My dad loved to do 2 things. My mom was a teacher, so we were always with her because she kept us at the same schools, so we'd stay together, my brother and I. But when my dad came home, he liked to cook and he liked to watch the news. And I figured that my best chances of getting like really close to my dad outside of, you know, the things you have to do with your kids or whatever, I was like, I'll just go sit next to him while he watches the news. He seems to value knowing what's going on. And if we've got this thing in common, that's my connection to some very precious time. And so I wanted to be close to my dad. And I am. And then my grandparents lived in D.C. They were retired military outside of Andrews Air Force Base, and the Washington Post was all over the living room. My grandma said, "I'm sorry, it's so junky." And you're like, it's always like this, not in a bad way, but in grandma's house way, like newspapers are everywhere. And so when I was in high school, middle school, we lived in Panama. My 8th grade social studies teacher asked me to write an article about our guest speaker, and it was Terrence Roberts from the Little Rock Nine. And so my first piece was on, most prominent figures in school desegregation. And so I had a conscious about like what interested me, what was of interest to me, what I wanted to do. And then I started writing for the base newspaper. And then my parents had the privilege of studying in England between 9th and 10th grade at Cambridge University and studying an exchange program. And so that was the first time I traveled by myself from Panama to England. And I was like, I like this. And we traveled all the time. So being around a lot of different kinds of people and learning language and stuff, it just seemed like what you were supposed to do. And so got to high school, was the editor of that paper, editor of the college paper, all of that. And then I was like, well, I made a binder at home of all the people I really admired. And so while we started out with like the Connie Chungs and the Carol Simpsons, I was like, Soledad O'Brien is badass. Like I watched her all the time. I was like, man, and she's got like 4 kids and she's like, I want to be that. I want to be that. But I also, Oprah went and got a magazine, and she's got this talk show, and then Isabel Wilkinson's at the Washington Post. Like, I like them all. And so I just put profiles of people I liked in a folder that is still at my mother's house. And I was like, but you're supposed to pick one thing, so what is that? And I just didn't know. I was actually ahead of my time. You don't have to pick anything. It was called multimedia, but we didn't call it that. So I went along the print track, got an internship in college at a local NBC station in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, caught the bug. The only time I had time between studies, cheerleading, and the newspaper office was 5 in the morning at the local TV station. One day, there was a story they didn't know about. I knew all about it. A kid had died in foster care at a facility in North Carolina. He'd been hit by a train. And it was a story they had to cover that day. And I said, I know the guy who was his mentor at the thing, because he was friends with my college boyfriend. And I said, I can take you there and get the interview. And so they needed me that day. And I went out with a reporter named Shaniqua Manning, who now lives in Washington State, and a photographer named Pete. And got to my advisor, she said, well, you finished, you can graduate a year early. Didn't realize I was in that mode. And I said, well, I'm not ready to work or give up my military ID. I'm gonna go to grad school, and I'm gonna go somewhere that'll teach me how to do TV, because I was writing a lot, but I didn't have the tape to get a reporting job. And so I got into Syracuse, and went there, had an amazing experience in Newhouse, and Oprah Studios called after I went to their table at NABJ that summer. I was on the student projects, and my mom liked to take her morning walks, and they had Oprah caps, and I was like, can I get one of those for my mom? And she's like, yeah, what do you do? And I gave her my resume. She was like, oh, you should interview for an associate producer job. So I went to Chicago, and it was cool, but then I said, I really want to be a reporter. And when I was in the airport, WECT in Wilmington called. And they said they wanted me to come. So that was perfect. So I started in 2005, the week of Hurricane Ophelia. My mom didn't want to let me go to work. She said, you can't go to work, it's a hurricane. I'm like, I gotta be in the hurricane. That's what they do. That's what they do. So the station, it was a Raycom station, they put us up, 3 of us, this was unheard of, we're starting that week. A new weekend anchor, morning anchor, and then me, this little reporter. And I spent the night, my apartment wasn't ready. I spent the night in that hotel, and like everything's flying off the windows, and I just went out there. We just started. And I started in TV. I stayed there 18 months, went to Greensboro, North Carolina, actually High Point, but Greensboro market. Worked at a Fox-owned station. It was back then owned by Fox. And that's when I began to do network hits. That was strategic. I knew owned and operated stations were used by the network to deliver stuff. So there was a young lady from Georgia who was the student body president at UNC, and she was murdered then. And I ended up covering her extensively and showing up on Shep Smith's show and Geraldo, and then got a taste of that. Went to Nashville. Only stayed a year because I decided to get married, have a baby. So I set out for, what did I do? I set out for a year. And then I went back to work, and I'd moved back to North Carolina and I called my old station. They were expanding a morning show, and I went back, but then I kind of felt bad. Not that this mattered, but to me at the time it mattered. I was like, I'm back where I've already been. Like, I'm not moving forward the way I want to. So I always tell students, like, perform or act like you are where you want to be. So the International Center for Journalists had these fellowships. Like, if you pitched a really good story, it was called Bringing Home the World, they would fund you to travel. And I was like, I'm gonna go to China. And I went to China to report on the furniture export industry, like how it was coming back to life, yeah, in like High Point, you know, that's where the furniture market is, Lexington, Thomasville, all these places that had shut down and manufacturing areas, agriculture and furniture. North Carolina was shipping out to China a lot more because of a growing middle class. And I was like, that's gonna be my sweep series. And they're like, you doing what? You going to China? And my news director at the time was like, well, after I was selected with the pitch, she was like, well, I'll send this up through corporate. I've never been a corporate gal. She was like, because we have to get this approved. And I'm like, why? I just want to take off, like, this is going to be good. I'm bringing you. She was like, I don't know. And when do I need to let you know in case they say no? And I said, well, if they say no, I'll just quit. And I was ready to quit. I wanted to go to China and be like a correspondent, and this is a good story. And so anyway, she looked at me like I was crazy, but I didn't quit. We did the story. It was good. Then I went to cover the military. Nobody wanted to live in Fayetteville, North Carolina, where I'm from. Was born there, finished high school there. And a longtime reporter in the bureau there was leaving. And the news director, Rob Elmore, who's now the GM there, he said, I need somebody who's good, who understands the military, like the language of the military, and who wants to live in Fayetteville. I was like, I want to go home. I got my baby, we went home. And the military sex assault scandals started breaking out. And then I found myself covering court martials, and I understood what it meant to, how to translate it for the audience, how to translate the process of seating a panel versus a jury, how UCMJ worked versus civilian law, how essentially you can act like you are guilty until proven innocent, that it works in a different way. And so I was out on General Jeffrey Sinclair's sex assault case round the clock from Fort Bragg, now Fort Liberty, and started reporting for ABC Radio and CNN.com, because they would send folks in and out, but it's good to have a local person who knew the layout. So I was about to re-sign, and WSB, I always sent tapes out for, or reels out for feedback. I liked where I was. But I was like, okay, if you leave this job, it was a good job and an O&O, I love ABC. I was like, what would you leave this for? I was like, WSB or Cox in Washington. So I sent the tape. I was like, hey, can I get feedback? I didn't ask for a job. I was like, hey, you gotta be strategic in the way you talk to people. I'm like, hey, I'm doing this, and that. And got the call, came here the week of Thanksgiving 2015 to interview and started in February. And I've now lived in the Atlanta area longer than anywhere in my life, and I just got here in 2016. So while at WSB, perfect place, both owned by Cox, I was like, I could write for the newspaper too. Nobody else would like to write like that. But I was like, no, because I'm moving into investigations. I want to collaborate with them. And so got to travel to Mexico, Virgin Islands, to talk about how Home Depot had destroyed 1 million pounds of goods that the folks there were waiting on FEMA to bring in so they could file the insurance claims when other corporations had kind of gifted the stuff that hadn't been destroyed to the survivors. And so got to do an investigation there, got to talk about private hospitals in Mexico. We probably shouldn't have gone at the time, got chased down during that story. So I got to expand, I got to do things, and then I would write the story for the AJC. And I like to write my investigations because we only had so much time on TV. I wanted to write on the web the full, give you something that I couldn't give you on TV. And I would stay all the time. At night, I'd stay and well, that served me well because then ProPublica expanded in their South unit. And I was a little worn with local TV, if I'm being honest, with what happened during the election, not knowing. I was like, I want to do deeper investigations, and so I landed at ProPublica. And the first story they had me write, I actually wasn't sure if I wanted to write it, but it was interesting at the time how Cobb County schools was bucking the trend of COVID protocols when everybody else was doing a very, specific thing at the time. And so my kids were in the school system. And I ended up last minute pulling them out during the Delta wave when I just started at ProPublica because I was like, whoa, and we had like sick kids in our neighborhood or whatever. So I wrote like this first person narrative thing, and I'm like, man, I don't know about this. It's not how I wanted to come into investigations, but it was good. It set the framework to cover COVID in a certain way. But while I was doing that, and while I was doing open records requests, I spotted the Heritage Foundation in the school board chair's inbox on some other stuff. And this is before we were talking about CRT. And I was like, it's like weird to come to his public school board email. Like, what's this all about? And then I saw the language that they were being coached on to then craft the policies that made us look up about CRT, like before we were talking about this. So I started looking at political movements, racial movements in that space, and just happened to get ahead of it. That's all. And then all my reporting was around that. Then I was kind of digging during COVID. I'll say this and I'll wrap it up. I know I'm long-winded. I was digging during COVID, kind of looking for some guarantee that we were going to get through this thing. It felt real bad. And I went into archives, Howard University, and found my great-grandfather's medical school records in the wake of the first pandemic, Spanish flu, which got me to thinking about what was happening in the climate with race and pandemic and all this stuff. So I started following his journey that led me to some stuff on black medical schools. And so I'm looking at this thing through a narrative journey 100 years apart, like where we were in 1918 to 2020 through the lens of black healthcare. So that's where I am. I just turned in the first draft of that in September, so I'm working on edits, and I left the newsroom in April, and I'm just working on book and teaching, and then Morehouse expanded, and so I don't know, this is how I'm here. I've got a weird here's where I am, and I don't know where I'm going next. But that's it. That's it. That's the journey. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.